going to hear from group number 1, which is the investor group, government and private. And if you could stand up when you give your remarks. Thank you.
Hi. Everyone at my table stepped back, so I was left to talk again. We looked around at the government, mostly government-inhabited funders at our table, and we were looking for new partnership opportunities, and we realized that the BRAIN initiative was a good example, so thank you. Oh, you want more? Well, we actually did talk about it a little bit more. I think part of what we realized was that there were some big players that we think could be very impactful that really have not been materially participating in the BRAIN initiative to the utmost of their capabilities. And when we began looking at the ecosystem of who was participating and what were the missing pieces, there were two groups really that kind of rose to the top. The first was some of the large technology companies that are kind of leading the big data, analytics, machine learning, kind of graphical representation and rendering types of technologies. So thinking of Google, Microsoft, IBM, et cetera. And they each have, along with a number of private funders like Chan Zuckerberg, the Broad, and so on, they're starting to put money into these areas, but a lot of it is not coordinated. And these fabulous tools that have been so impactful in applying machine learning to such a wide range of technologies, where from 1 month to the next, whole new solutions are emerging, where without a priori assumption, these new technologies are looking at vast data sets and extracting entirely new understandings and representations that are creating, literally $1 million revenue products on the order of 6 months of development time. So we think that a very attractive potential new public-private partnership would be something that could collectively induce the Googles of the world, the Microsofts, the IBMs, along with some of the private funding industries, government support and stewardship, to come up with an entity, an organization, a program, to make it possible for all of these technologies to be applied to the developing data sets. Obviously, there are challenges of standardization and making the data more uniform and having protocol and data representations with semantics so that we can handle the evolution of what we need in the databases without breaking formatting and translation capabilities. But we think that's one very important piece. The other constituent of the ecosystem that has been, I won't say absent, because actually Inscopix is a good example of the type of company that I think could be very important. But historically, kind of the nimble Silicon Valley startups that operate very efficiently and very quickly with new cloud services and business practices around technologies like Slack, it's very difficult for those types of innovators that maneuver from one quarter to the next as markets evolve so rapidly in this area to participate in government-funded programs which have very paper-bound approval cycles, 4-year contract commitments that you must obligate yourself to. And so we think that there should be some development of this ecosystem to find flexibility and ways to open source, for lack of a better word, the type of technologies in an ecosystem that would allow those innovators to really participate materially.
Great. Thank you. All right, group number 2, and whoever's doing the reporting, if you can stand up, introduce yourself.
I'm David Anderson from Caltech. My lab studies emotion systems in the brain in flies and in mice. And we were talking, our charge was to propose an ambitious multi-stakeholder collaboration to advance the mechanistic understanding of the brain and or therapeutic development. And the types of multi-stakeholder collaborations that we thought about generally are two types. One is one that integrates vertically across scales of biological organization in the brain, from molecular level to cellular level to circuits to systems. And the other is one that integrates horizontally at a particular scale of analysis, say the circuit level of analysis, across different organisms, all the way from model organisms to humans. And so an example of the latter would be, for example, there's been a lot of discussion about looking for circuit-level endophenotypes that are associated with particular psychiatric disorders or neurologic disorders in particular disease models. And so one could imagine, this would be a challenging undertaking, but that was our charge, a consortium of investigators that include human imagers, people that work on monkeys, people that work on mice, people that work on non-traditional model organisms, birdsong, zebrafish, whatever. And the idea is to see if one can focus on maybe not even an entire disorder, but a symptom domain of a psychiatric disorder, for example, anxiety, and to see whether one can see any evidence of signatures at the circuit level that appear to be at least analogous, if not homologous, across species. And that would require a huge amount of coordination between the stakeholders. It would require, because different modalities of imaging are going to be used in the smaller organisms where one can do single-cell calcium imaging, larger organisms like humans where you do fMRI, potentially non-human primate like marmoset could be a useful Rosetta Stone where you can do fMRI and single-cell calcium imaging with Inscopics in the same organism to get a mapping function for those, and then to pay careful attention to species-typical behaviors that are associated with these either resting state or evoked circuit-level signatures, because it could be that the behavior in one experimental organism that is most relevant to understanding a symptom domain of schizophrenia is not the one that you as a human might intuit or imagine by trying to impose your views of human behavior onto a mouse or a marmoset. It might be the behavior that is most causally associated with the circuit endophenotype that you're looking at. And that would cause you to focus on a different kind of species-typical behavior that could potentially be a much better model for trying to make these links across organisms. So this would be something very challenging to achieve. An incentive to bring people into something like this is to give them pre-publication access to new technology that other stakeholders would be developing to allow them to carry out these kinds of studies, both behavioral and imaging, and in exchange for free exchange and sharing of data. But this would require major social engineering because it cuts across very different communities, clinical communities, basic science communities, imaging, ethology, and ecology. So that's one example of that type of collaboration.
Great, thanks, David. Table number 4. 3.
Okay, representing group 3, table 3, I'm Hong Kui Zhen from the Allen Institute for Brain Science. So our charge is to propose ambitious multi-stakeholder collaboration, and we chose the topic of therapeutic development. And we first identified the other stakeholders because we are supposed to be the research community, which we all are. The other stakeholders we identified are clinicians, disease foundations, industry, and funding agencies. And we developed a list of asks for those stakeholders. First, for therapeutic development, we asked the clinicians to develop better diagnostic criteria and to do much more comprehensive and complete phenotyping of the patients, as well as normal controls, especially in the areas of phenotyping, behavior phenotyping, endophenotype identification, biomarker development, and in conjunction with the research community, do genomic phenotyping, and then combine all this information together. Oh, I also forgot. Circuit study, identifying the circuits that may be abnormal in the patients as well, using newer technologies such as better fMRI, as well as much larger sample size. So basically, with all these different kinds of information together, between the collaboration of clinicians and researchers, will have correlated information at individual patient level, from genotype to behavioral phenotype to biomarkers and to potential circuits that underlie those changes. And then really identifying the kind of potential causes and use that to divide up the patients so that the researchers can use that information to develop better animal models and potential therapies. At the same time, we also have the idea that maybe we can initiate some investigator research-driven questions. For example, there are a lot of us doing basic brain research, mechanistic discovery, and we hope that through the mechanistic discovery of particular circuits or genes that are affecting behavior, not necessarily abnormal, but just like things underlying feeding behavior or anxiety or cognitive functions. And we hope to identify market for the mechanisms, circuit mechanisms that the research identify. And for that, we would like to have, ask the foundations to provide patient information, as well as the industry provide pre-competitive stage patient information so that we can collaborate with researchers to identify diseases that may be cured through the mechanistic study, and co-development of technology platforms based on all these different interactions. And finally, in addition to this kind of research and discovery activities, we would like to see especially between academia and industry, pre-negotiated agreements on the legal side, some kind of coordinated or national standard in terms of how you can facilitate collaboration between non-profit organizations and for-profit organizations. And finally, for the funding agencies, for the investigators, we hope that the funding agencies can promote more non-PI-centric grants, really to promote collaboration and to promote data sharing across the entire community.
Thank you. All right, group number 4, and if we can please try to keep the comments to 2 minutes to keep everything on time.
Okay, my name is Scott Stenson. I'm a group leader at the Genelia Research Campus in Virginia. My lab studies the neural basis of hunger and other basic motivations. So, the question was about multi-stakeholder collaboration, and the topic of the collaboration that we thought everyone was interested in was the circuit basis of neural function and also neurotherapeutics. So with that as the sort of umbrella for the collaboration, we focused on different, and then we considered the stakeholders as well. The stakeholders we defined as the researchers, of course, but also a variety of different funding sources: government, industry, finance, so the investment community, as well as philanthropy. So those were, and then as well, based on the conversation we were having in the last session, clinical experts as well as people from the regulatory side of things. And so then we focused on on 3 different models, organizational models, on which collaborations could be based, with essentially that would maybe be characterized by different levels of effort to organize them. So at the lowest level of effort, one could fund and evaluate essentially grand challenges, whether it's models for autism or the neural basis of reaching, for example, of motor function. But essentially, they would have to self-organize, and you would have effectively these different categories: the researchers, the funding agencies, the clinical people, regulatory people, essentially evaluating these types of proposals and their projects, and whether or not they sort of get the money at the end that they can use to further that line of research. Then there's, at a slightly higher level of organization, there's sort of a multi-lab, multi-institution level of collaboration, and then that really puts a lot of pressure on data standardization, frameworks for sharing data. A lot of this is actually being developed at the Allen Institute and other places, and essentially right now that's in one institute, but could be used to fragment these, spread these types of collaborations across multiple areas. And then, the most complex and way to do it would be a localized institution that's heavily focused on a particular problem. Some of the same problems we've already talked about, like visual cortex function at the basic research level, or schizophrenia in the way that the Stanley Center is at the Broad Institute. And in this case, you're embedding in a major university a structure where there's a good bit of funding for the ongoing research. There's quite a bit of shared resources so that common research problems can be centralized and don't have to be replicated in each individual lab. Moreover, it was deemed to be important to try and separate investigators from raising large amounts of money, so to fund these in a way that people can have a fair amount of time to deal with the science and not just raising money. And so there are examples of this where I am, the Genetic Research Campus, although it's not in a major university, but also Allen and Stanley as well are good models for pouring money into a very specific problem that allows researchers, but also potentially a point of contact for clinical and regulatory individuals to come and as well as people on the finance side to come and try and increase the likelihood of progress and success in that either basic research problem or in a clinical therapeutic.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Group number 5.
So my name is Francesco. I'm from the Radboud University in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. So at our table we discussed many of the same topics, so we tried to actually come up with a concrete example of what such a collaboration could look like. So we thought that we would concentrate on one disease, one that is actually very difficult to crack, such as depression. And we thought, why don't we actually look at depression on a very large cohort? And so, for example, of the country of Iceland, where everybody is already being sequenced for genome, and then look at all the depressed patients there and have a full collection of clinical data, including scans, including endophenotypes and biomarkers at the level of circuit. So that would also involve a refinement in non-invasive circuit readout techniques, so that can be applied to patients, so such as better fMRI, EEG, MEG, and other non-conventional techniques. So, and include in this database as much as possible about the birth history, social history, work history, family history of these patients. So that, of course, would form a very large database. So that would, in fact, involve technology companies that have the power of mining, visualizing, and make sense of such big databases, and then expand this to larger populations, so beyond the 300,000 patients, inhabitants of Iceland, and look, for example, in larger population for selected genes that come out as target of interest from this study, and look, for example, at what are the suppressors and triggers, so what determines the fate of subjects that have a gene that represents a risk factor for depression, so why some get depressed, some don't. So this would involve building a large technological, clinical, and informatics infrastructure, so with involvement of technology companies of very different kind, and keep everything in an open source framework so that single researchers and small companies can also take advantage of that.
All right, now we're going to move to the trainees, table number 6.
Hi everyone, Anton in Namar Science Lab in Boston. So here we're the trainee table. We generate the data. We all have PIs that are very optimistic and believe in our superpowers to figure out what those data mean. But being more serious, there is an obvious hurdle that is coming ahead of us, which is data, big data. We've mentioned that word a lot. How can we make the analysis of this data transparent, reproducible, unbiased, and open source? So we thought the best way would be to mutualize the analysis of this data by asking people that are actually expert in doing this. Because if I take a week to analyze this data, maybe someone else can figure it out in 2 hours. So the one problem is that in academia, for example, computation analysts might be very busy with their own projects, which is a problem because we cannot necessarily ask, we can establish collaborations, but we cannot necessarily ask every single day someone to just spend 6 hours on my data. So one way to, oh, I dropped the mic. Thank you. So one way to do that, I feel bad about it, but it would be actually, you know, the biggest car company in this world does not own any single car. And so maybe one way to mutualize the data very efficiently would be just to have a company or maybe a little subset of, well, is it me? That would analyze data for us in a very specific manner. So these people would be trained to deal with neuroscience data. And they would not necessarily be driven by the need to publish, which could also be a benefit because this would make it unbiased. Transparent because they would not necessarily have anything to hide, and reproducible because they would be actually dealing with our data, and experience is expertise and vice versa. So this is what we came up with. I hope I'm not forgetting anything, but yeah, that's pretty much the idea.
Great. All right. Table number 7.
My name is Krishna Jayant. I'm a postdoc in Rafa Eustace lab at Columbia University. So just as we just discussed with the trainee bench, so we're basically going to talk to you guys about from a trainee's perspective. And so we're under the assumption that we've created a really large project. And the project here is to create a completely non-invasive, fully integrated wireless telemetric device that's sitting inside the brain of a human being. And we're able to kind of, you know, stimulate and record with single cell precision, okay? So this is the project, and we're there. Now, how do we get there? So we're kind of creating some sort of a framework. And in order to create this framework, and this is specific from our perspective, trainees' perspective, right? So no single PI has, at least in our view, has the ability to do this project on his own, okay? So we need, at the ground level, we need a multi-PI approach. We need trainees to be trained to do these kind of projects with expertise coming from every corner. So we need people with, for example, engineering backgrounds, MDs, neuroscientists, biologists, maybe, and as one of us put it, if there's actually any data that comes out of this, data scientists who can actually help us analyze this data. So given that you have this team that's putting together a project, we've got to bring an industry partner to the table too. Now, the reason for this is twofold. One, we get an additional funding source coming in from industry, and at the same time, they can help guide the PIs and the project to kind of coming to a common goal. And in addition to this, with government partners, which, you know, for example, DARPA and NIH, et cetera, would help kind of govern the project as a whole. Now, this is like some sort of a watchdog approach to kind of say that every 6 months we would kind of come in and see whether there's any problem in the project, and then should we have meetings, you know, from time to time again, to kind of redefine the problem and actually have a dialogue between different groups, different scientists in a collaborative environment. So the basic theme that we kind of outlined there was find a common goal amongst all of us, because there has to be some sort of vested interest for each group that's coming to the table. And at every step along the way, because we're eventually getting to this product which is going to be used in humans, we've got to have an FDA person at the table. We've got to be able to say that every 6 months, 8 months, you know, why don't we bring the FDA person in, let him have a look at the project, decide if there are any problems that are there, you know, in the process flow, that we, you know, so that we can actually see an eventuality to the project. So one thing that we've thought, I mean, these are like when the question says define your ask of other stakeholders, was maybe we should have more meetings like this where we actually have a dialogue between neuroscientists and industry. And I think that's very, very important, because that's something that, I come from an engineering background and I've seen that in engineering. We don't have that in neuroscience. We have one meeting a year, and we don't have a common podium where we can actually discuss problems that we're facing. And if there is a common dialogue between industry and academia, I think it would be really, really good for neuroscience. So based on that, we thought that eventually, once we get to the consumer level, we thought that this multi-project, multi-PI industry and industry sponsors as well as government sponsors would be the right way to kind of go forward. So that's our thoughts.
Thank you.
All right, now table number 8, Pharma and Biotech.
This is the little table, as you can tell. Bill Martin with Blackthorn Therapeutics. We took as our inspiration some of the successful multi-stakeholder collaborations that have taken place within the neurodegenerative space. And within neurodegeneration, there's obviously an awareness that this is a progressive disease, and the temporal dynamics there are being critical in terms of thinking about developing novel therapeutics. But that same appreciation is lacking in the field of psychiatry. So we propose a natural history collaboration looking at behavioral data that would look at disease progression within psychiatric disorders, neurobehavioral disorders. And for this, we propose both a retrospective and prospective analysis where different stakeholders that would come to the table retrospectively, a large pharma, which has many extensive clinical data sets and samples, as well as prospectively looking at some of the sort of technology players and partners who could really help with the large-scale behavioral phenotyping, and then the academic community would support then associating the large-scale phenotyping with functional impairment and improvement. And then ultimately, the goal would be to further identify sort of patient subtypes within these syndromic disorders over time, and turn to foundations and sort of patient advocacy groups to help support sort of patient registries that would enable sort of tracking of these patients. And then ultimately, collectively with all of these stakeholders together, turn to regulators to help us kind of redefine endpoints, within and across these different syndromes.
Right, table number 9, tools, platforms, and devices.
So I'm Shung Jeff from Inscopics. I think our table was almost all engineers at our table. I would say that much of our audience consisted of commercial folks, and that probably colored the answer that we came up with. So we spent a lot of time talking about what would motivate a group to collaborate together. And I think that the science part already has its motivations, and those are pretty clear. But on the commercial side, as Bill Brody pointed out, it's all about getting a return out of the situation. And I think that the one thing that we kind of meandered about, but then finally got to, is the fact that the timescales for achieving goals in neuroscience have been extremely long. And I think we need to find a way to shorten those timescales. So there was a suggestion from somebody in our group that in order to shorten those timescales, we really need to define a project which kind of forces some collapsing and really accelerating collaboration and kind of crossing all the different modalities and timescales and spatial resolutions that need to be crossed at a tool level. And then just to close, I think the other interesting point that came out of our group was that I think we've been very centered around the brain. And just to echo something that Corey said, I think we have to look beyond that. And in terms of a collaboration, I think we also need to look beyond just the sphere that we have in this room and need to tap funding sources, other problems in science that's being solved within the rest of the body. So,
Thanks, Sean. All right, table 10, disease foundations and nonprofits.
I thought we were 11.
Hi, everyone. Mark Frazier from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. A lot of the concepts that were discussed at our table were already mentioned, and let me just emphasize a couple. One was, in addition to targets, industry also wants reproducibility from academia, and so we talked a lot about ways to incentivize rigor and reproducibility in academia and industry, and ways that we could structure our grants and milestones to really incentivize that rigor. And that led to some discussion of just what the incentives are for academics and biotechs, and are there ways that we can change the incentive structure through both our funding, but also through public pressure and working with patients to raise these issues of what the potentially misaligned incentives are in the medical research enterprise. One other point that we talked a lot about was creating an infrastructure, an ecosystem for sharing of data, particularly clinical trial data from previous clinical trials and specifically failed clinical trials. One thing we don't do in neuroscience very well is failure analysis of clinical trials, and we talked about shared efforts that could be done across disease foundations to provide guidance on how to consent patients, leaving it up to the individuals to volunteer their data if they want to share their own data from clinical trials, but also provide an infrastructure for that data sharing. Because as many of us know, as soon as companies kill a program, there's no resources internally, even if they wanted to and were legally allowed to really put that data in an organized way. So we think there's an opportunity here for cross-disease foundations and nonprofits to provide guidance and infrastructure for that data to enable data mining and really understand why clinical trials are failing and guide new development of better clinical trials. And then finally, we talked about understanding this deep phenotype that's been mentioned all day and developing these large data sets in different diseases and analyzing it within the disease, but also there are examples of foundations, particularly one where Fox Foundation collaborated with Alzheimer's Association to analyze PPMI data and ADNI data to look at common biomarkers, common pathways that are affected in neurodegenerative diseases. They may result in a different clinical outcome, but looking at some of the imaging changes, both in normative and disease brains, were really informative and are leading to new insights into our understanding of these diseases.
All right, last table 11.
Hi, I'm Jerry Dawson, and I'm a professor at Duke University and direct the Duke Center for Autism and Brain Development. And I think I was put with the foundation group because I'm also president of the International Society for Autism Research, but also served as chief science officer for Autism Speaks in my history. Anyway, we envisioned a project not dissimilar to two others that were talked about, although it does have a slightly different twist. A project that would involve, or require, I should say, partnership with industry, government, foundations, private funders, but also the public and medical providers. So we envisioned a large prospective natural course longitudinal study in which research would be integrated into routine clinical care. And that the study would result in data that would be taken not only from the electronic health record, but also combined with digital phenotyping and other biomarkers that people would propose would be important for predicting disease. So one of the things about this study that's a little different, though, is that we really stress the idea of discovering mechanisms and predictors across a wide range of diseases, not only brain diseases, but other health conditions. So this would allow us to explore the effects of factors, not only like environmental risk factors, stress, nutrition, but also other body systems, the immune system, hormones as children enter adolescence, and so forth. It would also involve strategic sampling that would be based upon epidemiology, and also the biomarkers where we could go in and do deep phenotyping and collect EEG and other kinds of non-invasive measures that would allow us to really understand the brain. And then finally, hopefully with all the data that's collected, we would be excited to be doing bottom-up big data analyses where we would discover things that people could not predict.
All right, thank you everyone for your participation.